Hello and good evening, everybody. My name is Noah Newman and welcome to tonight's virtual town hall. The COVID pandemic has dramatically changed medical education across the United States, forcing students and institutions to rapidly adapt to continuously changing circumstances and guidelines. These changes have left students and institutions to adjust without much precedence or guidance of how to best do so.
Good evening. My name is Omar Latouf. I'm a professor of cardiac surgery at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. Recently completed a long career at Emory University in Atlanta, and that's where I had the pleasure of meeting Noah and had the chance to work with him during a summer term. I discovered that Noah is an exceptionally brilliant person, and we decided to stay in touch with one another. And as this COVID came about, we reconnected, and I learned from Noah that he and many students across the country were practically furloughed from their responsibilities in the hospital for fear of being exposed to this horrible virus. As much as I appreciate our concern for the safety of our medical students, I was more concerned that they are the future of medicine. And they are the future leaders of medicine. And if they do not get their appropriate opportunity for learning who is going to lead the nation, take care of the nation, who's going to be the brilliant scientists and physicians 10 years from now, you all are. So accordingly, Noah and I had conversations that led to writing a manuscript, which was submitted and accepted for publication, and since then has received a number of worthwhile comments. And a chain reaction has happened to many other things that since have developed and are likely to expand. So Noah has assembled an impressive team of faculty and students to address this issue. I feel that this issue is extremely important, and I hope it will be documented and further published. So I welcome all of you for being here with us, and I look forward to hear you and learn from you and hear the recommendations of students and faculty. Thank you very much.
So tonight's going to be divided into two parts. Our first panel is going to be composed of two medical students. They will share their reflections, followed by a Q&A. Afterwards, we will have a second panel of three faculty who will also share some reflections with another Q&A. For the Q&A portions, please submit your questions in the comments section so I can share them with our panelists. First, a quick disclaimer. All panelists participating tonight were contacted by me. They are not here on behalf of any organization or institution. They are sharing their own opinions on these subject matters. That should not be interpreted as an official statement from their host institutions or programs. So later we're going to have our faculty panel, but first tonight I would like to welcome our student panel. For the Medical College of Georgia, we have Sahara Lee, a third-year medical student. And from UChicago Pritzker School of Medicine, we have Helen Way, a second-year medical student. So thank you, you two. I'm going to add you into our stream. It's a pleasure to have you two on tonight.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us.
So Sahara, I'm going to start with you. You could just give us like a couple minutes of reflection. How has this last 6 to 8 weeks been for you with COVID as a medical student?
Yeah, it's been very different. So as a third-year medical student, I'm on my clinical rotations right now, which is something that I feel like all medical students kind of look forward to. After 2 years of didactic, you finally get to go into the hospital and see patients on a daily basis and get to learn from these patients that actually have illnesses that you have been learning about this entire time. So I was on my internal medicine rotation, and I was actually in infectious diseases at the time. And so basically 3 weeks into my rotation, we were told that we couldn't go in anymore and that this was for our safety as well as our faculty safety and our patient safety for us to kind of take a step back. So right now we are completing the didactic part of our clinical rotations online. So we're doing that by completing online casework, by continuing to have academic half days, and we actually still have our board exams at the end of each rotation. So for instance, I just took my internal medicine board exam on Thursday online proctoring, which was really weird. And then we are also completing at the same time an elective course that we would have taken our 4th year. So that way we're kind of opening up time in our 4th year for us to go back into the clinics and finish the rotations that we were supposed to do before. Now, we won't get the same amount of time. For instance, I'm supposed to complete 6 weeks of surgery or 8 weeks of surgery right now, but that probably will not happen. Likely it'll be kind of shorter, maybe 4 weeks of surgery next year. So this has kind of been, it's been weird, but it's also been interesting to see how our medical team has responded to it, which I think they've done a pretty good job. I know they're working around the clock to make sure that we are being as prepared as we can be. They actually created an elective for us based off the pandemic called pandemic medicine. And in the course, we have been able to learn about past pandemics as well as COVID-19. We've been able to listen to physicians from really hard-hit areas like Georgia and New York. We've also been able to listen to financial advisors about the economic impact of COVID. So it's been really interesting to be able to learn about the pandemic while it's happening. A part of that elective is also that we get to do a service project. So I've been helping with a fundraiser to get PPE and a bunch of other stuff to our hospital. So that's been interesting as well.
Okay, that's really, really interesting stuff. And thank you for sharing all that with us. Helen, you're a second-year student. I'm curious to hear how the basic sciences education has changed for you, and you were about to take step 1. So tell me about that.
Yeah, for sure. So right when quarantine started was actually when we finished our last preclinical exam. And so the consensus kind of was, well, it's interesting that we're going into quarantine because we're already going to be going into quarantine ourselves just for dedicated. I think the difficulties sort of lay in the fact that stay-at-home orders and social distancing kind of prevent prometric sites from being able to administer those step exams. And so plenty of my classmates have had to deal with a ton of uncertainty surrounding their exams, which I think is actually the worst part of our experience, just not having really any control over what we can do over the next couple of months. And so there have been several changes that occur, and we're very appreciative for our administration for having weekly all-school Zoom meetings to keep us updated as much as possible on what's going on at the institutional and national level. But yeah, for a large number of us, we have pushed our step exams back, although I know a couple lucky few who have been able to take their exams actually, which is really great for them. So in the meantime, because we can't study for forever, like 12 weeks, several of us decided to instead do a 5-week research block. And now for those of us who have exams rescheduled from April to July, we will be starting our dedicated study block again in the upcoming weeks. And so right now we're just kind of trying to stay positive, hoping that we will be able to take our exams. And if not, that we'll have enough time to prepare for the possibility that if our tests do get canceled, that we aren't too deep in our study. But in the meantime, several medical students have joined these amazing research and volunteer opportunities and really made the most out of it. And I think it's really showed me how resilient we truly are. And I'm sure that we'll be able to take so much of what we learn and incorporate that into our future careers.
Right. That's really interesting as well. Sorry again about the delay and all the stuff. I'm sure that's very difficult.
Yeah.
So here, I'll propose my first question to you. And so I was wondering, we can't be out of the hospital forever. COVID's still probably going to be around for a little bit. But how comfortable are you right now returning back to the hospital given the current climate and situation?
So this is kind of a difficult question. I think for me, and I feel like for a lot of medical students, we just want to go back in. And we want to, our highest priority is making sure that our patients are safe. And I think when you go into medicine, you kind of already go in knowing that you are exposing yourself to some sort of risk. You don't know what the risk is until you're there, but there is some sort of risk involved. So all of us are prepared to go back in, but it kind of just goes into, are we going to be there and are we actually going to be adding on to our patients' care, or are we going to be taking away from our patients' care? So right now, I would love to go in. I declared OBGYN, and this is supposed to be my surgery rotation that I'm supposed to be doing right now. So I really want to go back in, but at the same time, I want to make sure that my patients are going to be okay with me being there and that they will be safe when I am there.
Right. And those are some really good points. Helen, I actually have a similar version of that question for you. A lot of students who are rising second years or who are going to be coming into medical school next year, they're going to be going into large lecture halls of 100+ people. How comfortable would you feel going back into a large lecture hall back in the fall?
Given all of the data, I eagerly await to see how administrations kind of respond to this huge challenge of being able to offer education to the hundreds of students who are paying for medical school. And I do have faith in administration, like our school administration's ability to innovate and try and do their best in order to make remote education as high quality as possible, and making sure that we can follow public health recommendations regarding, are we even allowed to gather in lecture halls? Maybe not, given what we know about how this how this pandemic may progress. But I have full faith that schools will be able to respond appropriately and using data to just sort of back up the decisions that they make.
Right. I mean, the lecture hall is definitely not abiding by the 10-person maximum of the CDC guideline. So Seher, my next question back to you is, with the first 2 years of medical education, it seemed to be a lot of online lectures or recorded stuff that we could watch online as students. The third and fourth years have been sort of slower to adopt a lot of online distance-based learning. So do you feel like the third and fourth years are really conducive to that as a student? Do you feel comfortable doing online distance-based learning as a third or fourth year student?
So I think it kind of goes into how are you actually going to be practicing when you're in residency and when you're a physician, right? I think online platforms are great to get a knowledge base down. And if you learn about telemedicine, that's great. But as far as actually seeing a patient, being a part of a patient encounter, touching the patient, feeling the patient, listening to the patient, those are not things you can really do online. So for instance, our class, we have started to do online cases where they walk us through a patient case, kind of like how you would in a hospital if you were admitting a patient. And although those are great resources that have a wealth of knowledge, it doesn't stick the same way, if that makes sense. I think when you're in the clinic and you get to see your patient and you take ownership of your own patient, that's a completely different feeling than anything that you can have in your first or second year or anything you can have online.
Right. And I totally agree with all that. And I'll be curious to see what sort of innovations are made to give us that complete patient interaction experience in coming years. So Helen, my next question for you, could you tell me one sort of adaptation or one change that your medical school has done that you've really appreciated or that you feel like they've done really well, or maybe the opposite, maybe something that they've done that you thought this could have been done differently?
Yeah, I think this has been on my mind because, STEP in particular is just a huge part of our lives. But something that, I know that other medical schools do, but Pritzker doesn't, is take STEP after their clinical year. And although our STEP deadline has been moved back a couple of months, so going from May to now August, the administration has been extremely supportive and highly flexible, telling us that, hey, we understand that these are really unforeseen circumstances. We're willing to do what it takes to make you as comfortable as possible when it comes to taking STEP. And so if it has to happen where you take it after your clinical year, which is not how we tend to do things, we're going to do our best to make sure that you do as well as possible on this exam that does, determine a huge portion of your future. And so something that I've been highly appreciative of is how our school has been able to respond to everything relatively quickly and provide us with those updates and listen to our feedback about, how we're interpreting all of these things happening around us. And so just the fact that they're being so flexible about it, like, it's really putting our minds at ease, which has been wonderful.
Right, that's really, really nice. And getting that student feedback and making changes accordingly is really important for any administration. So that's great to hear. Sahar, I have a question for you regarding what sort of student-led responses you've noticed students have been taking. I've seen all kinds of stuff on Facebook and social media about student-led responses. So anything at MCG that sticks out to you?
Yeah, we've actually had a whole wealth of different student-led responses. So the one that I've been involved with is the fundraiser for our hospital. So basically, when we were put on clinical pause, the first thing that kind of came to us was, if we can't help by being in the hospital, then the next thing we can do is support those that can go into the hospital. And so our class president started a fundraiser, which I had the pleasure of helping her kind of start up and fundraise for. And then we got basically like most of our class involved. Everyone, the great thing about medical students is that they just do everything themselves. And so everyone was really self-motivated. We had a handmade mask task force. And so they made over, I think, 1,000 like hand sewn masks, and they're still making them. We were able to send them to Albany, Georgia, the hospital Phoebe Putney there, because they've been hit really, really hard. We also have campuses in Athens and in Savannah, as well as Rome. I know Savannah and Rome have been really involved in telehealth. So they're like contact tracing as well as screening patients. And then we've had different smaller things that are going on. One of my best friends made a children's book about COVID-19. One of my other friends is doing a fundraiser for backpacks for children from disadvantaged backgrounds so that they can get through this time. So there is just a whole host of different responses, and it's honestly inspiring to see how my colleagues are kind of stepping up to the plate and figuring out how to get involved, not in a way that's not clinical.
Wow, that's all really impressive and amazing, and I'm really glad to hear students are taking initiatives. Medical students, like you mentioned, we really do go above and beyond.
100%.
Helen, I'll give you the last question for now. And my question is, what is the general vibe amongst the student body in your class? Are students like happy and ready to go back and enthusiastic, or is there sort of a like disillusionment or sort of negativity going on?
I think it is very different for different people, but overall, generally people are pretty stressed about everything that's going on. The good news is that people still try to, put on wellness events to support each other's well-being, and all in different ways. And so we're trying to stay optimistic. Overall, coronavirus is making it very difficult to stay optimistic. And, I think we'll be able to make the best out of the situation, thankfully, with the support of each other. But yeah, overall, everyone always asks us how we're doing. And I think it's really easy to say I'm fine, even though we're likely not. But I think we're all trying to do things that, make each other happy, make sure people are well connected and supported in their social networks.
That's fantastic to hear. Students are supporting. Glad to keep the vibe and energy going well. So those are my questions for you two for now. You guys stay tuned in the broadcast studio. People might have questions for you later on, and I'll bring you back in. Now we're going to turn to our faculty panel. So I'm going to take you two out and welcome our three faculty panelists. So first we have Dr. Tim Peters. He's a pediatric infectious disease doctor, and he's an associate dean of educational strategy and innovation at Wake Forest. Next, we have Dr. William Alley. He's an emergency physician and the clerkship director for the third-year emergency medicine curriculum. And last, we have Dr. Carl Richardson. He's a cardiology attending and associate program director for the internal medicine residency. Can you guys hear me loud and clear?
Yeah, pretty good.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So we'll start sort of like with the last panel, where we will each go around and give sort of a reflection on what the last 6 to 8 weeks have been like, any advice or tips we want to share with students. And why don't we start with Dr. Alley?
So the last several weeks have been an adventure, and one of the best things that have come out of it, really for me, is just seeing how flexible students are and how willing they are to try new things, to help out. Sahara and Helen were mentioning just all the different things that students were doing to volunteering and helping out with the community and with the hospital and their patients, and I think that is amazing. From a faculty side, especially a clerkship direction side, we've learned that even though it's difficult for some to figure out technology and get WebEx or whatever virtual platform we decide on going, it can be done, and students actually do a really good job of being encouraging to those folks who have a little bit of trouble with it. I've heard several faculty members feeling like they did a terrible job, and I still get feedback even on those lectures that no, things went very well, and students are incredibly appreciative. So I think things have gone as well as they could have. I would love to have students back, but we are very committed to having students back in a way that will keep them safe, as well as patients safe, of course.
Right. Well, thank you for all that. And I can imagine it's very challenging right now to be a clerkship director when you have a curriculum planned out, and then
right,
upends the whole thing.
Yep.
So Dr. Peters, let's go to you next.
Thanks so much for including me. As you know, I'm a pediatric infectious diseases specialist. I also teach a virology section, but oversee a hunk of the curriculum administration of the MD curriculum. So I'll say that, you know, I, like everyone on this conversation tonight, have been really deeply inspired by our colleagues everywhere who have been dazzling in their selflessness and courage in taking care of patients. All of us feel that. And that is in large part because of those people's personal courage and virtue. And it's also because of their training. And, you know, it's helped me to consider that, you know, a public health crisis like this is a time when we must continue to train doctors. It's not a time to let up. We've got to keep doing that exceptionally well. And so the medical education side of my job is extremely important, and I've been motivated by that as well. So to talk about the challenges is really an interesting discussion, but I've been inspired by medical educators across the country with this shared determination that we're going to do and continue to do an outstanding job. I've been struck by the coherence of all medical schools across the country, conversations between our dean, Julie Freischlag, and deans across the country to harmonize their approaches, to understand what everybody else is doing and to adopt best practices very quickly. And I've been struck by how similar our approaches have been. And that's been really interesting and inspiring. It's also sort of cause to reflect on potential benefits of this really tricky time. To managing uncertainty is an important component of resilience, and that's something really especially important in our careers in medical education. So as we at Wake Forest have adapted our courses to distance learning very quickly, I'll say that the things that have worked the best, that have surprised us at how effective they have been those things we've done in lockstep with the students as partners in curriculum development, right? And I use as an example the virtual instruction of our third and fourth year students, our immersion clerkship entering students, and those entering the individualization electives. So, we've had near graduate students who volunteered to help moderate discussion boards on these virtual class experiences and to participate in instruction. And that has been extraordinarily successful, well received by our students. So, so there have been examples of virtual educational experience that has exceeded our expectations in quality. Nonetheless, I share the sentiment that medical training is an apprenticeship model, and so having our students encounter patients is really important. We too will move as quickly as we can to safely get our students in front of patients, not just for the vital role that plays in training, but because it's long been said that patients get better care when there are students on the wards, and I really believe that. We in medical education really believe that. And so we need our students back in front of our patients so that we can take better care of them. And so it's a public safety issue. It must be done safely, but we're all across the country working toward that. So I'll sort of shut up now. It's going to be an effort, as you can probably but be glad to answer questions. I appreciate the chance to talk.
Of course, and I love that theme of working together, of harmony, and getting a united effort to overcome the challenges we're all facing. So now we'll turn to Dr. Richardson. Tell us a little bit, sort of the reflections that you've had as an associate program director.
Yeah, thanks first, Noah, for having me. A lot has changed. It's been this flurry of activity, both from a curricular standpoint and an education standpoint, and then a clinical standpoint, and it's been extremely hectic. Briefly, we have an entire curriculum for our house staff, and the medical students are engaged in that, and we've kind of had to move all of that en masse to WebEx. And so the noon report, for example, is on WebEx. The academic half days are in WebEx. The learning health systems lectures are in WebEx at Wake Forest now. And then clinical work has also been affected for both the house staff and the medical students. The consult rotations, for example, where the residents are playing more of a learner role and less of a direct patient care role, some of them have been stepped back. They've been allowed to work from home, knowing that they would be kind of a second tier were a number of our house staff to be out because of exposures. We've started to relax that a little bit, but it's affected a lot of this. Now, that being said, it's also been kind of an interesting opportunity. What we've noticed moving things to WebEx for the house staff curriculum is we have a lot more faculty engagement. And being one of these faculty, though I have access to Noon Report more regularly than others as an associate program director, I now attend probably half of them, whereas before I was allowed to attend, not allowed, but I was able to attend 15, 20% of them. And there's actually been, that's been an interesting piece. And we've talked about how months from now, we'll probably continue to use WebEx to a certain extent so that faculty and then students and residents can be involved more remotely. And then secondly, it's been really interesting from a telehealth perspective. That's a piece of clinical care that really has been more or less absent in our practice. And probably going into the future, it should be heavily incorporated in our practice. And so that's a piece that we've kind of latched onto and worked on trying to figure out how do we incorporate the residents and the medical students in that so that we can teach that. Looking at the medical students, it's been tough. From the residency side, we've kind of said we want the medical students there, and we really haven't considered it a danger to have them there. It's been in some ways a resource issue that PPE, there was a PPE shortage at first, and then now, and just in terms of exposures, not really for the medical students, but just the number of people involved. That being said, every time we have a meeting, we're saying, how do we get the students back involved? And then the question is, because, and I have to say, as one of the teaching faculty on service, we like having that team. A lot of the discussion about what's the diagnosis, what's the next step in the workup, we like having the medical student there, and we're looking forward to having them kind of reincorporated in the next couple of weeks, despite COVID. So in terms of what can students do in the meantime, one is get involved with the conferences. They're all remote now. And so we've worked on the residency side to make that possible for the students, because this is a great education opportunity that now is available, more broadly. And then second, research. A lot of times medical students latch onto research projects in their third year or fourth year as they're starting to think about residency. And then they kind of run out of time sometimes. But right now you have a lot of faculty that aren't as busy as they were before, and you have a lot of medical students that aren't as busy as they were before. So reach out, and I've had a couple of medical students reach out and say, hey, how can I get involved? I have all these little kind of things, that I'm ready to kind of say, hey, it's a project you can jump into. And then finally, I would say, don't worry. If you're a medical student out there, and it wasn't that long ago, I would have been terrified that I was missing out on my surgery clerkship, like we heard earlier, or like I was missing out on my medicine rotation. And I think in residency, and everybody's going to get there, that's where this massive transformation clinically happens. And there's lots of time to get that exposure still. So in medical school, there's learning, there's clinical care, there's research, there's lots of kind of learning to think like a doctor. And that can still happen right now pretty well. And then finally, I'll say one more thing, and then I too will shut up. What we're kind of starting to get worried about, or starting to kind of engage with mentally, is how do we recruit? Going into the interviews, I don't know that it's going to be tough for the students as much as, well, at least it doesn't seem like that first, as how do we reach out and show students how awesome our program is, the same way we would in person. How do we introduce them to our house staff? How do we introduce them to our institution, and convince them this is the best place to train? And that I think is something that we're just starting to grapple with going forward. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you, Noah.
Of course, it was all very informative. Honestly, pretty soothing and putting me at ease, because I know a lot of other medical students were very anxious about the situation. So.
Don't worry.
So I'll reinforce our audience to our viewers. If you have any questions, put them in the comments section underneath. I'll get notifications, and I'll be able to read them to the panelists, so we can get some more discussion going. So with that, I'll start with some of the first questions. And my first question relates to an article that I read recently on Medscape. It said that 15% of medical schools plan to restore students to medical education or to clinical care by the end of May, 55% by the end of June, and 77% by the end of July. So Dr. Peters, my question for you is, as a dean and as a virologist and infectious disease specialist, how realistic do you think it is that many medical students get back to clinical care in that time frame, the next couple of months?
Sorry, go ahead.
And I'll say either, in North Carolina and even nationally.
Sure, it's a complex equation. I haven't read the paper that you cite, but I would say that the primary barrier, as I see it, to having our students return to the wards is PPE availability, right? So we will not be able to create an environment in a hospital where our students are free of exposure or have reduced exposure to COVID. That's ridiculous. It's a hospital. So, that's not a goal that we're trying to achieve. What we need to do is make sure our students have access to excellent PPE at a level that will keep them safe and secure it's a public safety issue, right? Not just them getting sick themselves, which was deeply concerned about, but communicating that virus to other patients or others in the community. So, but it's that as I frame those concerns, is a PPE availability issue. Having said that, yeah, I do think that those plans by these schools nationally are realistic. They're an important part of continuing training in the face of a public health crisis. We need these students to be well trained. We need them on the wards soon. And so I really do think those timeframes are realistic.
Okay, thank you for that, and I sure hope they are as well. Because like Sahara and Helen were saying, we're ready to get back in there. So my next question is to Dr. Ali. So a lot of research literature has been coming out showing significant declines in non-COVID related cases over the last few months. In the emergency room, you see all different types of presentations, but do you have concerns about lower volumes of patients coming in for your medical students to see?
So I've considered that, and maybe a few weeks ago I would have said yes, but our volumes are picking up pretty significantly. Both seeing respiratory complaints as well as seeing all the usual situations. Patients are, I think, as we're seeing in the community, people are just getting tired of being in the house. And sometimes that's coming out of the house means getting the medical care that you probably should have gotten a couple weeks ago. And sometimes that means that those maybe more urgencies have become emergencies. So right now, I believe that we are seeing plenty of cases, and even a couple weeks ago, one thing that I've really been thinking about is how we have to change a little bit how we envision medical care in an academic institution. So for so long, we've kind of used a ladder approach. This is kind of how it was when I was a student, where I saw the patient first in the morning when I was on peds or internal medicine. I saw them way too early in the morning, woke them up, made them mad. And then maybe the intern came in and we all reported off to the chief resident, who then had that discussion with the attending, who then went and saw the patient again when we were on rounds. So one thing that we're going to have to do, especially if volumes are not as high as they have been, is maybe go all in together. So the student and the resident that I'm working with and myself are just going to all go see that patient. Or for patients who we don't want, well, we want the student to be able to see them, but for right now, considering exposures and reducing exposures to students for potentially for COVID, have the students stand outside the room. And most of our rooms have doors with windows. You can kind of see the patient, see what they look like, but not be in that potential exposure zone. And then all discuss that patient, talk about what I saw, what I heard, and then let the student take it from there with developing their differential, developing their treatment plan, and going through what our thoughts are on how we should manage those patients in a little bit different way than what we typically have in the past.
Right. Well, thank you for all that.
Sure.
I'll be curious to see how those changes are implemented.
Of course.
Okay, so this question I have for Dr. Richardson. This is actually a question from the audience. This is from Shahar Latz. She is a second-year medical student at MCG. She was wondering about how students who wanted to participate in away rotations, which are pretty influential for residency, where they can go, how do you anticipate students not being allowed to have these away rotations? So how do you anticipate that will affect or impact students in their residency applications or along those lines?
Hypothetically, you could say, well, if the institution doesn't get to know the students as well that are rotating, and the student doesn't get to know the institution, is it possible that there would be you'd be less likely to recruit that person from that institution, or that student would be less likely to be interested in going to that institution because they haven't checked it out? But I would say that you're also going to have this tension. We both want, on the residency side, we want to have a diverse class. So we want to have people that are from Wake, and we want to have people that are from outside. And any given year, we want to have probably a significant majority coming from outside, just because we end up wanting to have 5 8, 10 people stay from wake, you know, something like that. So I think that the concern, if you were a student, might be, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to kind of show my stuff to that program. And I would say no one is. So, and we're going to be looking for the students from other programs regardless. So I'm not sure it would hurt to that extent. It probably will affect the students' ability to kind of learn about other programs. And I suspect that we will be, because we also want to shine, you know, we want to bring students in and show them how great our program is. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, that's already been a conversation. And we actually discussed this exact thing just recently. And so I suspect things are changing constantly. There will be some initiative to push this in some way, if not in the near future, you know, many months down the road. That's not a great answer, probably. That's a halfway answer. Again, I think it would fit with the theme of don't worry, because I don't think it's going to affect you in a bad way. But
no, that's really informative. And I know a lot of students are having that anxiety going forward as the way rotations are, you know, in dicey waters right now.
Yeah.
So my next question from the audience, I want to send to Dr. Peters. I remember you talked about during virology about, you know, the HIV epidemic and all the changes it had. So with some of the, it looks like diseases like HIV, SARS, and MERS, could you talk about how there are some similarities or differences to how those impacted your medical education versus how COVID has impacted current medical education? And thank you, Mark, for hosting that.
Yeah, thank you for this question and the chance to comment on that particularly. I'm an infectious diseases specialist in pediatrics. I've had the privilege of caring for persons living with HIV throughout my career. But early on, even as an undergraduate student and a medical student in the early 90s, late 80s, I really recall meeting persons living with HIV, talking with them, and really getting a sense of that terrifying epidemic in its early stages, those act up protests, the anxiety, the fear. And then through the course of my career, to witness miracles, the transformation of HIV from a terrifying death sentence to a manageable chronic condition. I cared for children from their birth to going off to college, with the expectation of a long life and a managed chronic infection. And so it's my hope and expectation that our medical students now will also witness those kinds of miracles through their career. And it's my expectation that this will be one of them, that we are in a moment that we will look back on and wonder, marvel at the success and response of vaccine and treatment development, and recall as a triumph of science and medicine. So that's an optimistic view of our current situation. The current situation is really, really serious. I don't want to give you the sense that I don't appreciate that. I really do. But as we look back on other epidemics during the course of my career, that is the sense that I get. That's the feeling I have. That's what I expect. That's what I expect to happen. You know, it's something to look forward to.
Right. Thank you for that. Dr. Alley, I'm going to give you the next question.
Sure.
So, new federal emergency legislation has relaxed some of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid rules that allow for telehealth. So it looks like telehealth is growing and it's here to stay going forward. So tell me, do you see telehealth becoming a new important part of medical school learning?
Absolutely, and then not so much in the emergency medicine clerkship, but many of the other ones, especially internal medicine. There's been a big discussion about including students on telehealth calls, and and really learning how that's done. Now, obviously in the emergency departments, most of the time we expect our patients not to have things that are so amenable to just calling and checking things out, but we also see a lot of urgent complaints. So we too are seeing our telehealth calls increasing, and as they do, I expect that will also become a part of the emergency medicine clerkship, as well as a lot of the other ones. So I think it's absolutely a very valuable part of your educational experience as medical students, because I believe wholeheartedly that telehealth is going to become a much greater part of how we practice medicine across really most specialties.
Right. And I totally agree. And I'm really interested to see how going forward we do incorporate it into all the various specialties. Dr. Richardson, I'll kind of pose a similar question to you. Telehealth is very much growing, and it is very much getting involved in curriculums. Just tell me, do you see any challenges with students or residents using telehealth? Are there any challenges that you've encountered or foresee with utilizing this technology?
Yeah, well, first I'll say I'm involved with directing the ambulatory clinics for the cardiology section, and this is really an opportunity more than anything else on the clinical care side. We've actually had a drop in no-show rates, and the ability to bring a patient back in a week, 2 weeks to check on their blood pressure and see how they're doing normally would have taken 20 minutes to get them in the room and get them situated and all that. You can have a 5-minute conversation now, just if you just want to touch base, or if you want to check on the state of their shortness of breath in the setting of diuresis, for example. Incorporating students, I don't think it's going to be as hard as we anticipate. In fact, medical students are kind of poised to do this well. Medical students, current medical students, have grown up with FaceTime. So this idea of interacting via video, and it's actually something that I, as a relatively young faculty member, have done a lot of as well. With young kids and my parents being grandparents, we use a lot of FaceTime. I feel very comfortable in a kind of a video call with a patient. And we've done a lot of that and pushed hard for video. So I think the students will jump right in and really learn to use video visits with ease. It's kind of the flip side, I would say. The most experienced physicians are the ones that you see struggling the most with, how do I conduct a visit when the patient's not sitting here? There's this whole idea of kind of doing things digitally. I think it's almost a shame we hadn't done this 5 years ago. Especially in we're not rural here in Winston, but we're in a little bit more of a rural place relative to, say, the Northeast or Chicago. A lot of our patients come from 60, 80, 100, even more miles away. And so learning how to do that is vital. And I don't think it's going to be hard to bring a student in, plunk them, right here next to me, and then we have that conversation. The same way I've been working with a PA in clinic that we're training. She goes in, she sees the patient, and then I follow her right in. There's no reason why a medical student couldn't join. In fact, we just discussed this in our weekly residency meeting about bringing students back.
Right, and that's
no PPE needed.
With what Dr. Alley was talking about earlier, how we're going to maybe find ways to change how students interact with patients going forward. Telehealth could be that great connection.
Yeah, and a lot of what we do in cardiology is counseling. Whether it's lifestyle or complex decision making around, is it time to fix the valve or not? Is it time to anticoagulate or not? And so a lot of discussion happens, and that's easy. It's almost easier, to do because of the accessibility perspective.
So I'm going to give 2 more questions, and I'm going to start with you, Dr. Peters. So at many institutions, lectures and other activities during the first 2 years of basic sciences are predominantly online. So because of this, do you feel like the faculty that developed the basic sciences curriculum have had an easier time or been able to do so more easily than those in the more clinical realm?
Well, the short answer is yes. So it is true that the preclinical curriculum, when you say online, is do you mean like lectures recorded and then available for, yeah. So didactics, that sort of teaching of knowledge, information transfer, that sort of instruction certainly lends itself to adaptation online much better than hands-on clinical skills instruction at the bedside of patients, immersion in patient care and an apprenticeship sort of experience. So absolutely yes. But it's very hard to do well, right? So it's easier, but it is not easy. You know, I heard a talk recently, I'm a pediatrician, and heard a fascinating talk recently about that really examined early childhood education and how inferior instruction is in very young children when it's two-dimensional, like off an iPad, versus in-person interactions. And so that they're really able to study in early childhood development the value of person-to-person communication. We're wired to respond to those kind of human interactions. And so it has caused me to wonder, you know, what those differences will be for adult learners. I don't think that it's easy or just as good necessarily to do two-dimensional instruction. And a lot of our instruction in our curriculum, in the preclinical curriculum, is heavily dependent on simulation training. Of course, anatomy instruction is largely small group instruction with dissections. So we have in our curriculum a huge amount of non-didactic instruction in the preclinical curriculum, very large percentage. And so maintaining the very high quality of instruction is not going to be easy, but it is easier than trying to pull off a clerkship, right? So, I guess that's a long answer.
No, it is fantastic and very thorough as well. So thank you for that. My next question I'm going to direct back to Dr. Richardson. So this looks like posted from a fourth-year medical student. This says, one question for you: what advice would you give fourth-year medical students applying to residency during a pandemic such as COVID-19?
Oh, good question. I think a couple things I would say, your fourth year is often a little scattered. And so going back to what I said in the beginning, the time aspect, get involved in other ways, like, well, not really in other ways, but capitalize on the time to get involved with the research project or to get back involved with the educational conferences. In terms of how to kind of prepare for interviews and everything else, I would say stay tuned. Because a lot of us right now, and we're all in this process, we're trying to figure out how are we going to show off for all of the applicants out there? How are we going to recruit? And I would say troll the websites of the programs that you're interested in, and don't be afraid to reach out to programs also, as we get that from students all the time. And stay tuned for how they're going to kind of try to recruit you guys to come and check it out.
Well, thank you for that. Now, I'm going to conclude here by first having all three of you just go around and maybe mention one sort of summary or highlight point that you'd like to reinforce, either something you mentioned or something you heard. So I'm going to start back with you, Dr. Alley.
Man, so I think probably the one thing that I would reinforce as a clerkship director, I love having students. I love to be able to see students, talk to students face to face. And we can't wait to have you back. We think, I agree with Dr. Peters that having students in the curriculum makes us better at what we do. When students are in the hospital seeing patients, we are better. We take better care of patients. We are going to do this in the safest way possible, understanding that there's risk with everything. But I would encourage students everywhere to know that the medical school faculty have your safety in our thoughts with all these decisions that we make, and you are still going to become amazing physicians, probably better physicians, having gone through this time than maybe other times. So don't worry, we'll get through this together.
Thank you for that. And it's really always nice to hear that reinforcement of faculty and administration looking after their students. Dr. Peters, I'll let you go next.
Yeah, I would just reinforce that message of encouragement and just note that society, for all those medical students who are listening and may be haunted by the fear that the quality of their education is going to be eroded somehow by this public health crisis. I would just say that society has an absolutely enormous stake in the quality of your education. So much so that all of our medical students have enormously complex safeguards to guarantee your competence that before you enter your residency training programs. And we're going to make sure that you are well trained and capable before that first moment on the wards as a resident. All the testing and assessment programs and boards and all of the rest, and an army of medical educators and clinicians and scientists who are really committed to that goal of making sure that you're ready. So set aside some of those worries if you're haunted by them, and then collaborate with the people, those educators that are around you to get through this time of uncertainty together.
I'll kind of tack onto that and say, again, kind of reiterate the don't worry aspect of things. We will kind of gobble you up as you come into residency, and you will learn more than you've ever imagined in the 3 to 5 to 7 years, however long residency programs manage to hold on to their trainees. So don't worry about that, and we will throw you right into the thick of it in short order. In the meantime, I think there's lots of opportunity to capitalize on this. The telehealth is bringing a dimension to medicine that no one really wrapped their heads around. And so the access, both from an educational perspective and for a patient care perspective, is really amazing. And this opportunity, I think there's a lot to learn. And don't worry that there'll be plenty of clinical care to be done in residency and the tail end of medical school. I think we're going to bring the students back soon.
Well, thank you to all three of you. You guys have provided some great insight tonight. I'm going to pull the students back on real quick to share some brief summary and reflection as well. So you guys have listened to a lot tonight. Are there any takeaway points, something that you mentioned or something that you heard from our faculty? And I'll start with you, Helen.
For sure. I think it was really encouraging and validating to know that, they know how difficult it is for us as medical students, but they have, firm beliefs that we will be able to take so much away from this pandemic that will, make us better doctors and better people. And so I'm pretty comforted by, everything that they said tonight.
Yeah, I think that as a third-year medical student, this time is really difficult because this is kind of the time that we've been prepping for to kind of get back into it, start thinking about where we want to apply, how we're going to apply. And we've had so many talks about how that process works, but that process has completely changed. So I think for me, it was, and I think a lot of my classmates, it was kind of a source of anxiety. Just, how am I going to find my best fit? For me, I want to maybe leave the Southeast area, but in order to do that, I wanted to know if I'd be able to live somewhere else that's not in the Southeast, since I've been here since forever. And now that away rotations probably aren't going to happen, that's something that's been kind of anxiety inducing as well. But I think it is very encouraging to hear that we're all in this together, and that faculty recognizes that this is kind of a different experience that no one has gone through, and that we're kind of going to work through it together. I think what was said about the fact that every student is going through this is so, so important to remember whenever we feel that pressure, because we're so used to feeling that pressure. But sometimes we forget to recognize that everyone feels that pressure.
Right, 100%. Now I'm going to bring back the faculty one last time and have all of us together. And I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you guys. I think the show was fantastic. I've been getting great feedback from the comments I've been keeping up with on Facebook Live. Huge thank you to Helen, Sahar, Dr. Peters, Dr. Alley, Dr. Richardson. Like I said, we really appreciate your attendance. Special thank you to Dr. Haval Kelly. He taught me how to use the streaming platform and helped give me the idea. Dr. Latouf, also tremendous thank you for giving me the idea as well. Another special thank you to one of the rising second-year students in our class, Daniel Kaganov, who produced the intro video for the show. To all of our viewers, please share this with your peers and your institutions. I'm going to just give you a friendly reminder to check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/COVIDMedEd. I encourage you to continue the discussions on there, post ideas, post challenges, get some discussion rolling. We are in this together, as some people have highlighted here tonight, and the only way we'll do it is if we work together on it. So thank you again to everyone, and a good night.
Thanks, Noah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.